My name is Lorena Carmichael, and I'm 27 years old. The day I married into the Carmichael family, Chicago's wind felt sharper than usual, like the city itself was warning me to pay attention. But I didn't listen. I was too busy being in love with Daniel. Daniel Carmichael was everything his family wasn't: gentle where they were hard, patient where they were proud. We met when I was 25, during a real estate seminar downtown. He'd been charming but quiet, the kind of man who listened before speaking. I didn't know then that silence was the Carmichael family's favorite survival tactic. When he introduced me to his family a few months later, I realized quickly that his last name carried weight. The Carmichael Group wasn't just a real estate firm, it was a dynasty, founded and ruled by Theodora Carmichael, Daniel's formidable mother. The first time I met her, she studied me like she was inspecting a property for defects. Her lipstick was perfect, her handshake firm, her smile rehearsed. "So, you're the woman distracting my son from his work," she said. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Her husband, Henry, sat quietly beside her, slight, gray-haired, the kind of man who'd learned that silence was safer than honesty. Theodora did all the talking, and everyone else merely orbited around her. Daniel's brothers, Charles and Nathan, were both accomplished men. Charles, a corporate attorney. Nathan, a cardiologist. I expected Theodora to beam with pride. Instead, she called them my boys who got lost in soft careers. "You know what the problem is with modern men?" she asked me once during dinner. "They think intelligence replaces instinct. Legacy isn't built in courtrooms or hospitals. It's built in boardrooms." I remember glancing at Henry, expecting a protest. He just folded his napkin, eyes down. Later that night, Daniel apologized. "She's just old-fashioned," he said softly. "She doesn't mean it that way." But she did. I could feel it, like a draft seeping under a locked door. Our engagement should have been the happiest time of my life, but Theodora treated it like a corporate merger. She insisted on overseeing every detail of the wedding: venue, guest list, menu, even the color palette. When I suggested a cozy ceremony in Lincoln Park, she smiled tightly. "A Carmichael wedding belongs at the Lakeshore Club, dear. Tradition matters." Tradition. That was her favorite word. She called vendors behind my back, replaced my florist with a more respectable option, and sent the photographer a 20-page list of acceptable angles. I learned quickly that Theodora didn't plan events. She staged power. Daniel tried to intervene once. "Mom, this is Lorena's day too." "No," she replied smoothly. "This is the Carmichael family's day. She's simply joining it." My parents, two school teachers from Evanston, were polite but uncomfortable. They'd saved every dollar for the wedding, only to be told, "The Carmichaels will handle the expenses." What sounded generous was really control disguised as generosity. The day of the wedding was beautiful on the surface. White roses, champagne silk, the Chicago skyline glowing gold at sunset. But beneath it, I felt the first fractures forming. As I stood in the dressing room, veil trembling in my hands, Henry knocked gently and entered. "You look radiant," he said softly. Then, after a pause, "Don't let her break you." It was the first honest thing I'd ever heard from a Carmichael. The ceremony went flawlessly until the reception. Theodora gave a toast, champagne flute in hand, diamonds catching the light like tiny knives. "Today," she began, "we celebrate not just a marriage, but the continuation of the Carmichael legacy. A family that has always valued strength, ambition, and vision." Her gaze found Daniel. "My son has inherited that strength. I trust he'll pass it down to future generations worthy of the Carmichael name." Laughter, applause, but every word felt like a warning dressed as pride. When Daniel and I danced later, I whispered, "What did she mean by worthy?" He sighed. "She just wants the family to continue, that's all." "And if it doesn't?" He smiled sadly. "Let's not think about that tonight." But I did, all night. After the honeymoon, the real training began. Theodora insisted Daniel work longer hours at the firm. "You're being prepared to lead, not to linger." He left before dawn, came home past midnight, eyes hollow. She called him daily, sometimes twice. When I answered, she'd say, "Tell him to check his email. I sent revisions." Revisions. As if our marriage were just another deal she was editing. When I mentioned that we barely had time together, Daniel promised it was temporary. "Once I prove myself to her, things will get easier." "And if you never can?" I asked. He didn't answer. One Sunday, Theodora invited us to her country estate in Winnetka. Henry greeted me warmly, but his voice trembled. He'd grown thinner, like a man quietly vanishing inside his own home. Lunch was extravagant. Linen napkins, crystal water glasses, a table that could seat 20, though only 4 of us sat there. Theodora carved the roast herself, speaking as if hosting a press conference. "Daniel," she said, "I've scheduled you to accompany me to New York next week for the Investors Summit." "I can't," he said gently. "Lorena has a doctor's appointment." "Reschedule it," she said without looking up. "It's her prenatal checkup," he added quietly. Her knife froze midair. Then she smiled. "Oh, then by all means. We'll celebrate properly, once we know the gender." Her tone carried an unspoken condition. Only one outcome would be celebrated. That night, as we drove home through the quiet suburbs, Daniel reached for my hand. "Please don't take her too seriously," he said. "She'll come around once the baby's here." "Daniel," I said carefully, "your mother doesn't come around. People circle her." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. In the passing reflection of streetlights, I caught my own face in the car window. Young, hopeful, terrified. Somewhere deep down, I already knew what kind of war I was walking into. And I wasn't sure I'd win. The Phoenix of Chicago, the low copper-pink light that slides down the glass of high-rises at dusk, made the city look gentle the night we cut the cake. Nothing else was. Our place was warm and overfull, my parents in their nice church clothes, cheeks pink with pride. Henry in a cardigan he probably hadn't chosen for himself. Charles and Nathan arriving together with a lopsided bouquet from a corner shop because the fancy florist was closed, which was their brother code for we didn't want to give Mom the satisfaction of approving our taste. Daniel was nervous, moving around our kitchen like a storm could be warded off with clean plates and lit candles. He kept squeezing my shoulder, quick, apologetic pulses that said, I'm here, even if he had to leave early for work in the morning. Theodora was 30 minutes late. She entered as if the evening had been holding its breath for her, coat still on, perfume traveling ahead of her like an announcement. "Sorry," she said in a tone that didn't sound sorry at all. "Board call ran long." No one asked which board. With Theodora, there were always boards, committees, councils, places where she could be the voice that decided. The cake sat on the table, white frosting hiding the truth inside. Daniel's hand found mine. Everyone gathered, and we did the little scripted lines. Shall we? Yes, we shall. And then the knife slid through sugar into something soft and undeniable. When we pulled the slice free, color bled into air. Pink. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then my mother clapped a hand to her mouth and started laughing, crying, praising the Lord and the sonogram tech in the same breath. My father, who'd sworn he wasn't the type to get sentimental, blinked very fast and cleared his throat. I turned to Daniel. His smile was small and stunned and beautiful. I could tell he was already imagining a tiny hand wrapped around his finger, tiny socks lost somewhere in the dryer, a daughter with his softer features and my stubbornness. And then I looked at Theodora. Her face had the smoothness of marble, the kind that takes generations to learn. She tilted her head as if listening for a sound no one else could hear. "Well," she said at last, the word falling heavy as a gavel, "that's unexpected." "Unexpected?" Daniel said, lightness trying to survive. "Mom, it's wonderful." "It's life," she replied coolly. "One can't negotiate with it. We adapt." "Adapt?" I repeated, heat climbing my throat. Henry shifted in his chair. "Congratulations, sweetheart," he said softly to me. "A healthy baby is—" "The point," Theodora finished for him, almost kindly. "Yes, of course. Health is all that matters. For now." She lifted her flute, but didn't drink. The crystal looked like a weapon in her hand. The room split into overlapping conversations, my mother talking crib colors with Nathan, my father asking Charles about a recent case, while Theodora moved closer to the window, gazing out at the skyline like a queen contemplating the limits of her land. I went to stand beside her because courage sometimes masquerades as curiosity. "She will be loved," I said. I didn't realize until I heard myself that I'd used the future tense as an argument, a contract. "Love," Theodora said, "is the easy part. What's the hard part? Raising a child worthy of the name she carries. Our daughter will be worthy without your permission." She didn't look at me. "A daughter," she said softly, "doesn't carry a name forward. She carries it away." I thought of my maiden name, folded into a hyphen I didn't end up taking. I thought of my mother keeping her own name and the way people misspelled it on Christmas cards as if erasing her was a clerical error. I stepped closer to Theodora until her perfume, The salt snap of something expensive filled my throat. "You're talking about legacy," I said. "I'm always talking about legacy." She finally turned. "That is the burden of those who build. You didn't build this family alone." Her smile was neat and chilly. "Ask Henry, then, what he built." Across the room, Henry was patiently explaining to my father how induction cooktops work, and I felt a fierce, ridiculous affection for him. He looked up and caught my eye. For a second, his face opened. Apology, warning, a plea. Later, after the guests drifted into coats and goodnights, after my parents promised to come back Saturday with lasagna, after Charles hugged me like a brother who had survived the same battlefield, and Nathan whispered, "Text me if you need anything. I mean anything." Daniel and I stood among plates and crumbs and little pink smears. "She'll come around," he said too quickly. "Will she?" "Yes." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "She always recalibrates." "Like an instrument?" He laughed once, the sound breaking. "Like Theodora." I said nothing. We washed dishes in a silence that felt like a truce signed under duress. The pregnancy became a calendar of numbers and cautions. My blood pressure flirted with the edges. I learned the names of medications and the way fluorescent lights in waiting rooms flatten even good news. I learned that sleep can be loud when you're afraid. Every creak a catastrophe. Daniel tried. He really did. He came to the appointments he could. He learned to read ultrasounds the way some people read sheet music. He played Debussy on his phone to my belly and told our daughter stories about geodes and lake effect snow and why some buildings sway in the wind. But the firm asked more. Theodora always asked more. "You're being prepared for leadership," she told him one night on speakerphone, her voice turning our kitchen into a boardroom. "You don't get to clock out of ambition." "She's 31 weeks, Daniel said, glancing at me. "We're monitoring some things. I need to be home more." "Then marry someone who doesn't require attention," Theodora replied, "or hire it." He hung up without a word. His shoulders shook once, like a drawer shut too hard. I put my hand between his shoulder blades and felt how far away he was inside his own body. The next morning, Henry knocked at 10 with a paper bag that smelled like cinnamon. "Sticky buns," he announced, like a magician producing roses. He moved around our kitchen with the cautious competency of a man who has learned to make himself useful to avoid becoming visible. We sat at the table. He didn't speak for a while. After 2 bites, he slid an envelope toward me. Inside was a Polaroid, the kind that whites out with time. A younger Henry holding 3 swaddled babies, Charles, Nathan, and an infant Daniel, his hair dark, his smile unguarded. "Would have been proud of daughters too," he said, eyes not leaving the photo. "Would have learned pigtails, tea parties, would have been ridiculous about it." I swallowed a knot. "Thank you." He nodded, then added quietly, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not teaching my sons that love and permission are not the same thing." When he left, I cried so hard I scared myself. Daniel found me on the floor, his hands gentle on my face, and said, "She doesn't get to break you." And I wanted to believe him. Theodora stopped pretending. She didn't ask about the nursery or names or how I was sleeping. When she called Daniel, it was about quarterly projections and a rumor that an old rival was circling a development she wanted. She sent a box once. Expensive, white, heavy. Inside was a tiny navy blazer with the Carmichael crest embroidered over the heart. "For the next one," the note read. I put it on the top shelf of the closet, behind a stack of towels I never reach for. At 33 weeks, she came by unannounced. I was alone. The apartment smelled like lemon cleaner and fear. I had been distracting myself with baseboards. She walked in without waiting to be invited, the way she walked into meetings and rooms and lives. "You're early," I managed. I made time. She set her handbag on the counter like a claim. "We need to be realistic." "About what?" "About outcomes." She gestured vaguely at my stomach. "About risk profiles." "She's a baby, not a portfolio." She tilted her head. "Everything valuable is a portfolio. It either appreciates or it drains." I should have told her to leave. I should have said more than I did. But terror makes cowards of people who thought they were brave. "She will be fine," I said. "We will be fine." "If she isn't," Theodora continued softly, "you mustn't let sentiment drive you into further ruin. I have known women who do that. They cling to broken things because the breaking makes them feel important." My hand went instinctively to my belly. "Are you calling my daughter a broken thing?" "I am calling you unprepared." She stepped closer. "Legacy requires sacrifice. If you cannot provide what this family needs, someone else will." There it was, the line that wasn't a line so much as a guillotine dropped with elegance. I tasted metallic rage. What this family needs, I said, is less of you. Something flickered in her eyes. She smiled, small and clinical. Emotion without strategy is noise. She picked up her bag. I'll see Daniel at the office. At the door, she paused. If anything, untoward occurs during delivery, she said. Remember that clarity is mercy. I'll ensure the physicians understand the family's priorities. The family's priorities, I repeated, because I needed to hear the words again to believe them. She buttoned her coat. Yes, we can't afford to be sentimental when the entire future is at stake. When the door clicked shut, the apartment was too quiet, like a stage after the audience breathes out. I stood for a long time, hands on the counter, trying to anchor myself to the cool marble, to the floor, to the fact of my living body. I called Daniel. He didn't pick up. A minute later, a text arrived. In with Mom. Big client. Call you in an hour? I typed, she was here, and then, she threatened our child, and then I deleted both messages because screenshots have longer lives than we think. That night, I lay on my left side like the pamphlet said, counting kicks and bargains. Outside, the wind pushed at the window like a large, polite animal asking to be let in. I placed Daniel's hand over the pulse of our daughter's heel and whispered promises to the future I refused to surrender. I did not sleep. I listened. And somewhere between 2 and 3, I began to understand that the war wasn't coming. It was already here. By the time my contractions started, the world outside was asleep. Chicago rain whispered against the windows, thin and steady, like the sound of a clock counting down. It was 3 weeks early. I woke Daniel with a hand to his shoulder and a single word that cracked in half as I said it. Now! He was on his feet in seconds, still half dreaming, gathering the hospital bag, my phone charger, the soft yellow blanket I'd folded and refolded 100 times. Theodora had insisted on importing a bassinet from Italy, but I'd loved this blanket more. It was ordinary, bought with my own paycheck, no crest embroidered into its threads. In the car, the city was a blur of traffic lights and wet asphalt. I counted my breaths like rosary beads. Every contraction felt like a promise being broken. We reached Northwestern Memorial just after midnight. Nurses wheeled me through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and wet linen. My parents arrived within the hour, my mother's hand trembling in mine, my father trying to look brave. Henry came next, quiet, carrying a thermos of coffee and an expression that looked like prayer. When I asked about Theodora, he just said, she's occupied. Of course she was. Labor was long, stubborn, defiant. The doctor, Dr. Stein, spoke in the practiced calm of someone who has seen every possible ending. We may need to consider a cesarean if her heart rate doesn't stabilize, she said. Daniel's hand was wrapped around mine, slick with sweat. He kept whispering, you're doing so well, baby. Just a little more. Hours blurred together. Beeping monitors, the hum of fluorescent lights, the rhythmic swell of pain that swallowed speech. I remember the sound of the rain fading as dawn pressed against the windows. At 7:18 p.m., after 14 hours, she was born. A girl, tiny, quiet, too quiet. The nurse whisked her away before I could even see her face. Machines began to chirp in a language I didn't understand. Why isn't she crying? I asked. We're helping her breathe, said Dr. Stein. She just needs a little time. Then Daniel's hand slipped from mine. I watched him move toward the bassinet, toward the cluster of blue gloves and white coats. My world was a curtain, and their voices on the other side. And then another voice entered the room. Cold, deliberate, unmistakable. Where is she? Theodora. She walked in as if she owned the air. No mask, no gown, just her tailored suit, her pearls glinting like small moons under the surgical light. Even the staff froze for a second, thrown off by the gravity of her presence. Mrs. Carmichael, a nurse said, startled. This is a sterile area. I'm aware, Theodora cut in. I came as soon as I heard. Daniel turned, fury and fear warring on his face. Mom, you shouldn't be here. I have every right. That's my grandchild. Dr. Stein tried to speak, but Theodora moved closer to the incubator, her voice dropping into that terrifying calm she used in business meetings. How is she? She's having trouble breathing, a nurse replied. We're working on it. How much trouble? She needs assisted oxygen, ma'am. And if she doesn't respond? The doctor hesitated. We'll continue intervention until nothing, Theodora interrupted. If she's too weak to survive, it's better to let nature take its course. That's what her parents would want. The room went silent. For a moment, no one moved, like the air itself had been vacuumed out. Then Daniel's voice, sharp as glass. "What did you just say?" Theodora turned toward him slowly, perfectly composed. "I'm saying mercy is not cruelty, if she's not strong enough." "She is strong enough," Daniel shouted. "She's breathing. You don't decide that." "Daniel, listen to reason. I'm protecting this family from pain, from weakness. Get away from my daughter." Dr. Stein tried to step between them, but Theodora was already waving a dismissive hand toward the medical team. "You have my authorization. Stop intervention." "She's not your patient," the doctor said firmly. "You have no authority here." "I am the authority," Theodora snapped. "You don't know this family. What's at stake?" Daniel grabbed her wrist. "You're insane," he said. "You're actually insane. Let go of me. You tried to kill her." "Daniel," she hissed, voice trembling now. "You think sentiment builds empires? You think tears protect bloodlines?" "She's not a bloodline," he shouted. "She's a baby!" Chaos broke open. A nurse pressed the emergency call button. Henry rushed in moments later, breathless, calling out Theodora's name. And then, through all the shouting, the alarms, the clatter of metal instruments, came the sound. A cry. Thin at first, then stronger, fierce, alive. I didn't realize I was crying too until I felt Daniel's arms around me, shaking. He was sobbing into my hair, saying over and over, "She's okay, she's okay." Theodora stood frozen, staring at the incubator like it had betrayed her. Henry took her by the shoulders and pulled her away. "You need to leave," Dr. Stein said coldly. "Now." Theodora tried to speak, but her voice failed. For once she had no words. She turned, spine rigid, and walked out of the room as security entered. They moved our baby, our Claire, to the NICU. I lay on the table, still half numb from anesthesia, staring at the ceiling tiles as the adrenaline drained out of my body. "What happened?" I asked the nurse beside me. Her jaw was tight. "Your husband can explain. For now, rest. Your daughter's stable." But I couldn't rest. Hours later, in recovery, Daniel sat beside me, his face pale, hands shaking. "She told them to stop," he whispered. "Mom told the doctors to stop. She said it was God's will." I felt something cold and infinite open inside me. What? "She said we'd agreed. She lied. They thought she was speaking for us. If I hadn't been there, Lorena, she would have let her die." I turned my head slowly toward him. "She tried to kill our daughter." He nodded. Tears rolled down his face. "They've banned her from the hospital," he said hoarsely. "Security escorted her out. They're filing a report." Henry appeared in his doorway a moment later. His voice cracked. "I should have stopped her years ago." He sat beside me, took my hand, and whispered, "She's sick with pride. It's all she's ever worshipped." Daniel bowed his head. "She's dead to me." But we all knew people like Theodora don't die easily, not even when the world tries to bury them. 3 days later, I walked into the NICU for the first time. Claire was so small, 5 pounds of pure will, tiny fingers curling around my thumb. I traced the curve of her cheek through the incubator glass, whispering her name over and over like a promise. Behind me, Daniel said quietly, "She's perfect." I nodded, tears blurring everything into light. "She's the strongest Carmichael who's ever lived," I said. And I meant every word. When we brought Claire home, the air in our townhouse felt thinner, like grief had walked through and taken something with it. The bassinet sat by the window, the yellow blanket draped over the side, sunlight touching her tiny fists. She was safe, alive. But the house still hummed with echoes of that night. Daniel barely slept. He checked her breathing every hour, fingers hovering just above her chest. When she cried, he startled as though hearing the sound for the first time, every time. I tried to be calm for both of us, but whenever I closed my eyes, I saw Theodora's face in that delivery room, her perfect lipstick, and the words, "Let nature take its course." Nature had, in fact, taken its course, and Theodora was about to learn what that meant. The hospital investigation moved quickly. Daniel and I signed statements. So did the nurses. Dr. Stein's report confirmed Theodora had claimed to represent us, even instructing staff to cease unnecessary intervention. The words looked worse on paper than they'd sounded aloud. The hospital board called it medical interference. Security labeled it unauthorized entry. But Henry called it what it was, an attempted murder. He said it quietly, like a prayer he didn't want answered. When Theodora tried to call Daniel the next day, he let the phone ring until it stopped. Then she called again. Then she showed up at the gate of our townhouse, dressed in gray, rain streaking her coat. I stood at the window, holding Claire, watching her knock like someone rehearsing repentance. She stayed 10 minutes. When Daniel didn't answer, she left. That night, she sent an email. My actions were misinterpreted. I was trying to spare you both the suffering of false hope. Please remember that everything I do for this family. You will see that one day. Daniel read it twice, then deleted it. She thinks she's the victim, he said. She always did. Charles and Nathan came over the following week, bearing casseroles and outrage. We heard what happened, Charles said. Jesus, Lorena, are you okay? I nodded, even though I wasn't. Nathan was pacing. She's lost it. I mean, completely. I thought she was just cold. But this? Charles clenched his jaw. Dad's staying with me for now. He can't be in that house. Has he talked about leaving her? I asked. Charles nodded. He's filing. Finally. The relief that flickered through the room was complicated and shameful. The divorce was brutal. 35 years of quiet endurance finally detonated. Henry had documentation. Years of emails, financial control, emotional manipulation. Theodora had kept everything in her name. The house on Lakeshore Drive, the cars, the accounts. She'd weaponized tradition and called it marriage. But this time, Henry had Charles as his attorney. The day they served her papers, she was in her office at Carmichael and Coney, about to lead a meeting. Charles described it later. She didn't even look surprised. She just said, of course, like she'd been expecting it all along. The press didn't find out immediately, but the investors did. In their world, appearances were currency, and Theodora's balance dropped fast. Rumors spread that she'd overstepped with a patient, that her family was turning on her, that the Carmichael name was fracturing. By the time the hospital finalized its internal report, she was banned from their entire network for ethical misconduct and interference with patient care. Theodora called it character assassination. We called it consequences. Henry visited us a week later, pale but lighter somehow. He sat beside me on the couch, watching Claire sleep. She's beautiful, he said. You saved her, Lorena. Daniel did. I was too weak. He shook his head. You were fighting the hardest battle of all, surviving someone like her. He looked around the room, taking in the photos I'd hung. Sunlight, color, mess. You've made this place feel alive, he said softly. She hated that. Life she couldn't control. When he left, he kissed Claire's forehead. You'll never have to endure what we did, he whispered to her. But Theodora wasn't done. She began calling Daniel's business contacts, spreading stories about his emotional instability after the birth. She told associates that Henry had been manipulated by a gold-digging daughter-in-law. She hinted to anyone who would listen that Claire's survival had come at a cost and that she'd only wanted to protect the family's reputation. When her calls stopped working, she turned to threats. Legal letters accusing Daniel of defamation and interference with company assets. Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he resigned. He left Carmichael and Coney the next day, handing in his badge and walking out with nothing but a box of personal files and a small frame photo of me and Claire. I can start over, he said simply, without her name. He did. Within months, he registered a new firm, Carmichael and Partners. Half the staff followed him. Clients who'd grown tired of Theodora's ruthless tactics started moving their contracts over. Theodora's empire began to crack. First, one project stalled, then another. Then came a lawsuit from a contractor she'd bullied into silence. The investors she'd bragged about began quietly withdrawing. Charles and Nathan both called to tell us that she was unraveling. She fired her assistant for bringing her the wrong tea, Nathan said. Then she canceled 3 meetings and locked herself in her office. She's not used to being powerless, Charles added. It's eating her alive. Henry's divorce was finalized 3 months later. He got half of everything and custody of his own peace. The judge noted his years of unpaid work hosting business events and supporting Theodora's empire. For once, someone recognized the invisible labor behind her success. She moved into a small condo in Oak Park. No servants, no staff, no family, just a woman and her empire of silence. But the moment that truly ended her reign didn't happen in court or in business. It happened on a call she didn't know I overheard. Daniel was on speakerphone with her by accident. He'd meant to call Charles. Her voice came through the line, raw, stripped of its usual polish. You think you've won, she said, but the name still belongs to me. I built it. You're all feeding off what I made. Daniel didn't respond. She'll destroy you, Theodora hissed. That woman, your wife, she's already turned you against me. You'll regret choosing her. And then almost softly, that baby will ruin everything. Daniel ended the call. He sat down, head in his hands, and didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was quiet but certain. "No," he said, "that baby saved everything." He deleted her number after that, permanently. A few weeks later, a final email came from Theodora. No greeting, no apology, just one sentence. "You've mistaken defiance for victory. The legacy will outlast you all." I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed my reply. "The legacy isn't yours anymore." And then I blocked her too. In the months that followed, life started to rebuild itself from the ashes she left behind. Henry found work as a financial advisor for a nonprofit. He smiled more. He came to dinner every Sunday, always bringing something small for Claire: a stuffed bear, a book, a soft pink hat he'd knitted himself. Daniel's company flourished. He hired women in leadership roles, something Theodora had never done, and insisted every employee take parental leave, fathers included. At night, after Claire fell asleep, Daniel and I sat on the couch, the TV flickering quietly, the city humming outside. "Do you ever think about her?" I asked once. "Every day," he said, "but not in the way she'd want." I nodded. "She'll try again, somehow." He looked at me, steady. "Then we'll be ready." And for the first time in months, I believed him. Still, sometimes when the apartment was quiet and Claire's breathing filled the room, I'd feel a shadow pass through the memory of that hospital room, the one where Theodora's voice had nearly rewritten the ending of our lives. I'd picture her face, composed, cruel, certain, and I'd whisper into the dark, "You lost." Because she had. Not just her company, not just her family. She'd lost the one thing she could never understand, what it meant to love without owning. 3 years later, the morning light in our kitchen looked different. It wasn't the sterile brightness of a hospital or the cold gleam of Theodora's offices. It was warm, honey gold, curling across the floor where Claire sat in her dinosaur pajamas, building a tower of blocks and talking to herself about important construction business. Daniel laughed from the stove, pretending to flip pancakes like a short-order chef. "Ms. Carmichael, I need approval on this breakfast project," he called. Claire looked up seriously, tapping her blocks with a plastic spoon. "Approved, but add more syrup." I stood by the counter, coffee in hand, watching them, watching the life Theodora said would ruin everything. The one that had, in truth, rebuilt everything. Theodora never showed up at our door again. After Henry's divorce and Daniel's resignation, her name had faded from every conversation that mattered. She still owned the company, on paper, but it was a hollow structure now. Clients left quietly, staff resigned in clusters. Charles said the office felt haunted. "She walks through the halls like she's already dead," he told me once. Nathan saw her only once after that, at a medical charity gala. "She looked smaller," he said, "still perfectly dressed, but empty, like someone cut the power and forgot to tell her body." I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I felt tired. When Claire turned 1, a package arrived without a return address. Inside was a silver rattle from Tiffany's, engraved with her initials and the Carmichael crest. "No note, no card." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She thinks she can buy forgiveness." We sent it back unopened. Henry came to every birthday, every holiday, every quiet Tuesday he could manage. He had remarried a librarian named Janet, who brought books wrapped in brown paper and taught Claire how to fold paper boats. Sometimes he'd sit on our back porch and talk to me about the years he lost. "You think you can survive people like Theodora by keeping the peace," he said once. "But peace built on fear isn't peace, it's pause." I asked him if he missed her. He thought for a long time, then said, "I miss who I wanted her to be." Daniel's company, Carmichael and Partners, thrived. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Theodora had spent her life worshipping a name she couldn't control, and now that same name was being rebuilt by the son she'd tried to break. He hired women, single parents, people she would have dismissed as distractions. Every policy was the opposite of her legacy. Sometimes I'd catch him staring out the office window late at night, phone in hand. He never said it, but I knew what he was thinking. She'd hate this, and somehow that made it sweeter. 2 years after the hospital incident, Helen, the new Helen, the woman who lived inside Henry now, called to say Theodora had been hospitalized, a mild heart attack. She was 70, living alone in a small Oak Park condo. A nurse came twice a week. No visitors, no friends. Daniel read the message, then set his phone down slowly. "Do you think we should—" he began. I finished for him. "Go?" He shook his head. "No, just do anything." We didn't. There are some wounds that don't heal with visits. A few weeks later, a letter came addressed in Theodora's unmistakable handwriting, precise, almost architectural. Daniel hesitated to open it. We sat together on the couch, the envelope between us like a live wire. Finally, he tore it open. Daniel, I made mistakes. I see that now. But I did what I thought was right for our family. I was raised to believe strength meant control. Maybe I was wrong. I hope you will not let your emotions cloud what you could still achieve. You have the Carmichael name. Use it well. Mother, no apology, no admission, just justification, wrapped in regret's costume. Daniel folded the letter, expression unreadable. Then he said, "She's still teaching the wrong lesson." I took his hand. "Then let's teach Claire the right one." He smiled, the kind that doesn't hide anything. We already are. That Sunday, we had dinner at our place. Henry and Janet came early. Charles brought his fiancée, a kind woman named Emily, who worked as a public defender. Nathan arrived last, still in scrubs, exhausted but glowing. We made spaghetti and meatballs, Claire's favorite. When we all sat down, the table was loud, messy, alive. Claire insisted on saying grace. "Thank you for the noodles, the sauce, and the family that eats them," she said solemnly. Everyone laughed. But then I looked at Henry. His smile was soft, but his eyes glistened. He was watching her like someone looking at sunlight through stained glass, beautiful because it existed at all. After dinner, when the dishes were stacked and the laughter had settled into the quiet rhythm of a full house, Henry said something that stayed with me. "She'll never doubt her worth," he said, nodding toward Claire. "You're making sure of that." I took a breath, feeling the truth of it in my chest. "We all are," I said. "You, Charles, Nathan, Daniel, even Janet." He smiled. "That's the real legacy, Lorena, not the name, the knowing." I nodded, watching Claire line up her blocks again, humming to herself. Exactly. Sometimes I think about Theodora in that condo. Maybe she still watches the city skyline from her window, the same skyline she once ruled. Maybe she still believes power is something you can own if you just hold on tight enough. But I know the truth now. Power isn't ownership. It's what survives after someone tries to break you and fails. Last week, Daniel received one more letter, forwarded from the old Carmichael office. It wasn't signed, but we knew who it was from. The handwriting was smaller now, unsteady. "I hear the company bears your name. I suppose that's fitting. Take care of it." Daniel read it once, then slid it into a drawer. "I think she finally understands," he said. "Understands what?" I asked. He looked at Claire, laughing in the living room, and said, "That legacy isn't something you leave behind. It's something that lives in spite of you." Later that night, when the house was quiet, I stood by Claire's door. She was asleep, clutching her stuffed dinosaur, one foot poking out from the blanket. I thought about how close we'd come to losing her, about how hatred, even when dressed in tradition, can kill faster than illness. And I whispered into the dark, "You'll never have to earn your worth, my love. You were born with it." When I look back now, I see it clearly. Theodora's empire collapsed not because of scandal, but because of silence finally breaking. Because her family chose love over fear. She spent her life trying to immortalize her name. We spent ours trying to humanize it. And somewhere between the two, we found freedom. So when people ask what the Carmichael legacy is now, I tell them this. It's a woman who refused to be erased, a man who learned love isn't weakness, a father who found courage after silence, and a little girl who will grow up never doubting that she was worth saving. That's the real inheritance. That's what survives. If someone ever tried to harm your child because of pride or prejudice, could you ever forgive them? For us, the answer was simple. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. And sometimes, the only way to save a legacy is to burn the old one down.